So, and I'll share my screen in a moment, but Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. We're at a new Mishnah that's on page 109 in the Koran, and we're near the end of the chapter. But I think if it's okay with all of you, unless people, a majority of you want to try something different, I'm game for continuing in Avodah Zarah in this discussion of different aspects of how to get along with or how to do business with Gentiles. So email me or voice your opinions now, just unmute and say something, but I would just as soon keep on going. So, Mishnah here. One may not rent a house to a Gentile in Eretz Yisrael, and needless to say, one may not rent fields to them, as explained in the Gemara. And in Syria, one may not rent houses to Gentiles, but one may rent houses to Gentiles, but one may not rent fields. And outside of Eretz Yisrael, one may sell houses and rent fields to Gentiles. This is the statement of Rabbi Meir. Okay, so before we finish the Mishnah, I just want to explain these categories. So Eretz Yisrael, I don't know why he doesn't translate it, but it's land of Israel. Okay, so land of Israel is, as God declared, God said to Abraham and Sarah, go to the land that I'm going to show you. It'll be your heritage for all time. So the land of Israel is holy because it's chosen by God. People of Israel are holy because we're chosen by God. So the holy people are supposed to live in the holy land. Okay, so holy land of Israel, therefore, cannot have any idolatry within its borders. So you can't rent a house to a Gentile. This is and Gentile for this context, for this chapter, is an idolater. So you can't rent a house to an idolater in the land of Israel. Just a second. Okay. And needless to say, one may not rent fields to them, as explained it. So the renting fields we'll see in the Gemara, but we saw last week, you're not supposed to, anything you sell to a Gentile has to be detached from the ground, right? So a field might have a tree in it or something else that is for idol worship. So then the next category is Syria. So I'm surprised there's no note here as well, but Syria is clearly not the land of Israel, but it's also not outside the land of Israel. So it's this territory that was added to the land of Israel in the time of King David. So when at the time of King David, the boundaries of Israel were its biggest. So in the book of Joshua, the Israelites settle in the land of Israel according to their tribal territories. A couple hundred years later, time of David, they expand the territory. So that expansion northward, like in the time of King David, they made it almost all the way to Damascus. So that's part of Syria. So that could be considered, well, it's not exactly land of Israel, the original boundaries that God had promised, but it's territory that was acquired in war by Israelites, so it becomes holy. So it's this in-between kind of category. So there, you can rent houses to Gentiles, but may not rent fields. This is according to Rabbi Meir. And then outside of Eretz Yisrael, so anything beyond these boundaries, one may sell houses and rent fields to Gentiles. This is a statement of Rabbi Meir, because you're not worried about defiling the land because the land on which this house is and these fields are is not within the boundaries of the Holy Land of Israel. Yeah, Michael.
Is Ever Hayarden Eretz Yisrael?
So is the other side of the Jordan River Eretz Yisrael? So that's a question where the tribes of Reuben, Gad, and half the tribe of Manasseh settled. Is that considered land of Israel or not? There's a debate among the rabbis about that. Okay, so perhaps in this part they're going to explain what Eretz Yisrael is and what's included, what's not included. But this is a statement of Rabbi Meir. In land of Israel proper, no renting of houses, no renting of fields. In Syria, yes, renting of houses, no renting of fields. Outside of the land of Israel, yes to renting fields and houses. Rabbi Yossi says, in Eretz Yisrael, one may rent houses to Gentiles, but one may not rent fields. And in Syria, one may sell houses to them and rent fields. And outside of Eretz Yisrael, one may sell both these houses and those fields. So Meir was talking about renting. Yossi's talking about selling. And there's a background, Syria, right? Why they waited until this second statement of Syria to have the B. Syria is the name used in the Mishnah and Gemara to refer to the lands north and northeast of Eretz Yisrael that were conquered by King David. The biblical names for these areas are Aram, Aram of Damascus, and Aram Tsova. Talmudic Syria includes much of modern-day Syria and Lebanon, although the border of Eretz Yisrael was farther north than the border of the state of Israel. Because Syria was conquered by King David, which is classified as the conquest of an individual rather than as a conquest of the entire Jewish people, and was under the Jewish jurisdiction in different periods, it is granted an intermediate halachic status. Syria has a lesser level of sanctity than Eretz Yisrael, but some of the laws pertaining to Eretz Yisrael apply to it. There are other laws that treat Syria as possessing a level of sanctity between that of Eretz Yisrael and that of outside of Eretz Yisrael. Okay, so I kind of explained that before. Okay, let me just, yes, Bess.
Was the Golan Heights, when it says north of today's state border, was the Golan Heights captured by David and included in this Syria?
Yes, he captured that and beyond. So you kind of have to know the geography a little bit. You'd be going up into the mountains of the Golan Heights. You get to Hermon and keep on going in a northeasterly direction, and you get to Damascus, and that's as far as King David got. Okay, so the Mishnah goes on, even in a place with regard to which the sages said that it is permitted for a Jew to rent a house to a Gentile, they did not say that one may rent it for use as a residence, because the Gentile will bring objects of idol worship into it. As it is stated, you shall not bring an abomination into your house. And this is still considered the house of a Jew. And for the same reason, in every place, one may not rent a bathhouse to a Gentile, since it's called by the name of the owner, and onlookers will think that the Jew is operating it on Shabbat. Okay, so when you're renting a house to a Gentile, it's still your house, and you cannot you have to assume that a Gentile is going to bring idol worship into the house, and even though you're renting, it's still your house, and therefore you'd be having idol worship in your house. That's why you can't do it. And you can't rent a bathhouse either, because it's still your bathhouse, and you can't be seen as operating a bathhouse on Shabbat, even though you're not operating it, the Gentile is. All right, so this gets to other questions too about business, doing business on Shabbat. So we'll see what the Gemara gets into about all of this. Okay, so the Gemara on this, what is the meaning of the Mishnah's statement? Needless to say, one may not allow Gentiles to rent fields. Why is the halacha with regard to fields more obvious than the halacha of houses, right? In other words, what's the Mishnah assuming here by saying needless to say, when we're not exactly sure there is a needless to say, right? We have to learn these laws of renting houses and fields. What's the point of the needless to say? If we say that it is because allowing a Gentile to rent a field entails two problems, one of which is aiding Gentiles in encamping in the land, and the other one is that doing so releases the land from the mitzvah of separating tithe, this cannot be correct. So maybe, right, we have to understand agricultural laws that apply to the land of Israel and other laws that apply to the land of Israel. If we're renting a field, we have to already know that you can't do that because you're allowing Gentiles to encamp in the land of Israel proper, and you're releasing part of the land from the responsibility to give a tithe. And all the land of Israel, the produce of all the land of Israel is subject to tithing, and that's part of the holiness of the land, that so-called the land gets privilege from having tithe taken from its produce. And by renting to a Gentile, you're preventing the land from fulfilling that kind of mitzvah. Okay? The Gemara explains why that cannot be the reason for the needless to say. If that is so, the same can be said about the prohibition against renting houses, as it also involves two problems. One is aiding Gentiles in encamping in the land. So same thing with a field. It's like how do you understand camping? Do you camp in a tent or do you go camping in a cabin? Right. So what's your level of camping outdoors? And the one is that it releases the house from the mitzvah of a mezuzah. Right. So mezuzah on the doorposts of your house. But the mezuzah law, the problem is you put a mezuzah on a house no matter where the house is. It doesn't have to just be in the land of Israel, obviously. We put a mezuzah on all houses. So the mezuzah can't be the reason here for not renting to a Gentile. Rav Mishar Shia says in response, fixing a mezuzah is the obligation of the resident rather than an obligation that applies to the house. Therefore, if no Jew lives in a house, it's not subject to the mitzvah of mezuzah. This means that by renting a house to a Gentile, one is not removing the right to perform the mitzvah from the house. Right? So the house gets the mitzvah by the resident of the house, not just because the house is in the land of Israel, as opposed to the field, which is part of the land, and that has its own mitzvah inherently. The Mishnah teaches, in Syria, one may rent houses, but not fields to Gentiles. The Gemara asks, what is different about selling houses that it's not permitted to sell houses in Syria? The Gemara answers that it is prohibited due to a concern that this will ultimately result in the selling of houses in Eretz Yisrael. It's kind of a slippery slope. If you're going to allow it in Syria, which is quasi land of Israel, then you might be tempted to sell a house in the land of Israel too. So maybe this is an extra fence around the law, an extra restriction. No selling in Syria means also definitely no selling in the land of Israel. The Gemara challenges, if that is so, let us also issue a decree prohibiting renting houses to Gentiles in Syria, lest it lead to renting to Gentiles in Eretz Yisrael. The Gemara explains the prohibition against renting houses to Gentiles in Eretz Yisrael is itself a rabbinic decree, lest one come to sell the houses. And shall we arise and issue one decree to prevent the violation of another decree? Right, so we don't need to go so far in the decrees. It's one thing about selling, but it's another thing about renting. So renting is just a rabbinic decree for the land of Israel. Don't need to apply that also outside of the land. The Gemara challenges, but the prohibition against renting a field that is in Syria is also a decree whose purpose is to prevent the violation of another decree. as the prohibition against allowing a Gentile to rent one's field in Eretz Yisrael is a rabbinic decree, and yet we still issued a decree. The Gemara explains, according to Rabbi Meir, there, with regard to selling houses and fields in Syria to Gentiles, the prohibition is not merely a decree intended to prevent the violation of the decree with regard to Eretz Yisrael. Rather, Rabbi Meir holds that the conquest of an individual is called a conquest. Once Syria was conquered by King David, who is considered an individual in this regard, the sanctity of Eretz Yisrael applied to it. So there's a lengthy note here about what this means about a conquest of an individual. There's also this concept of what kind of war there is being engaged. There's an optional war, or there's a defensive war. Well, not necessarily defensive, an obligatory war. So the conquest of the land of Israel was commanded by God. So that's war that needed to happen because God commanded that to happen. The war that King David waged outside the land of Israel was optional. So there are different kinds of rules that apply to warfare when it is following the commandment of God to conquer the land of Israel versus optional expansion of territory. And then there's this idea of conquest by an individual. So let's see what this means. So here on the side, conquest of an individual, being that David was the king of the Jewish people, it requires an explanation as to why it's considered the conquest of an individual. Rashi on 20b, that was the page before, explains that King David did not conquer Syria based on God's command and with the aid of the entire Jewish people, right? That's what I was saying about it being it was an optional war. Tosafot, Rashi's grandchildren, citing Rashi, explained that the conquest of Syria was not performed with the entirety of the Jewish people and the Urim and Tumim. So the Urim and Tumim, which we're told about in the Torah as these special stones that were part of the high priest's breastplate, were used to kind of channel God to determine whether a war should be waged or some other kind of community-wide important issue to be discussed. So it was kind of an oracle that would help the leader and the Kohen understand God's will. Okay, so Urim and Tumim would be consulted about whether to wage war or not. So they're explaining that King David in conquering Syria did not use the Urim and Tumim. He just did this on his own, and he didn't require all of the army of Israel to do it. Many commentaries question this explanation, as large parts of Eretz Yisrael were not conquered by the entire Jewish people. Many early commentaries explain, based on the Sifrei, it's a midrash on the book of Deuteronomy, that all parts of Eretz Yisrael proper, that is, areas that are within the boundaries listed in the Torah, can be conquered by an individual. But with regard to territory that does not lie within the borders of Eretz Yisrael proper, the conquest must take place in a specific manner in order for the land to become consecrated. With regard to King David's conquest of Syria, the main deficiency is that he conquered Syria before he finished capturing all of Eretz Yisrael, and therefore it's considered only an individual conquest. So in other words, the rabbis debated over the centuries as to what were the proper procedures in conquering the land of Israel and expanding its territory. And some are saying you can't expand territory until you've already acquired all the territory that you're supposed to acquire. And so there always were pockets in the land of Israel of non-Israelites living there. The part like the Philistines expanded into Israelite territory, and there's some Canaanites who are also in Israelite territory all the time. So what was King David doing by not finishing that off, but expanding the territory anyway? Okay, so with regard to King David's conquest of Syria, the main deficiencies, right? before we finish. And some explain that in this context, the expression conquest of an individual means that this land was not conquered by the command of the Sanhedrin, but rather through the initiative of King David. Alternatively, there are those who explain that King David never conquered Syria with the intention of bequeathing it to the Jewish people, as Joshua did when he conquered Eretz Yisrael. Rather, his intention was to conquer it for his own purposes so that he could receive taxes from its residents. Right. So there's a whole debate, because then also the rabbis applied their law to how to conduct war back to the Bible, assuming then that there was a Sanhedrin who would be consulted. It's like the president consulting with Congress about whether to wage war or not. So the king needed to consult with the Sanhedrin. But there was no Sanhedrin in the time of the kings in the Bible, but the rabbis assumed that there was a Sanhedrin back then in order to give themselves the authority for having a Sanhedrin. So it's kind of reverse kind of logic. The rabbis needed to prove to the people that what they were doing was not new and creative, but rather extending what was already there in history. So even though the Bible doesn't make any mention of there being a Sanhedrin until the time of Ezra, who came back with the exiles from Babylonia in the 500s, 400s time frame, and then they're called the Great Assembly. They're not called Sanhedrin, they're called Great Assembly, whatever that is. So there is no Sanhedrin, as the rabbis know it, in the time of King David, but they say that there was in order to give themselves the authority for having the Sanhedrin when they do. You get what I'm saying here? Okay, so because of all that, the rabbis understanding in their understanding of how war should be waged, they're trying to explain their understanding back into the Bible itself to figure out exactly what King David was doing. Okay. Okay, so rather, Rabbi Meir holds that the conquest of an individual is called a conquest. Once Syria was conquered by King David, who is considered an individual in this regard, the sanctity of Eretz Yisrael applied to it. So for Rabbi Meir, if a king of Israel conquers a territory, then that territory immediately becomes part of the holy land of Israel. Therefore, concerning a field which has two problems, as one releases the land from the mitzvah of separating tithes and aids Gentiles in acquiring land in Eretz Yisrael, the sages issued a decree as a preventative measure, prohibiting the renting of fields just as in Eretz Yisrael. But concerning houses which do not have two problems, the sages did not issue a decree. So in other words, fields are more important than houses in that it represents the land itself. A house just happens to sit on land. So a house is temporary, land is permanent. And this gets into also, for those in the Orthodox, ultra-conservative political camp in Israel today, in the state of Israel, the whole idea of these outposts on hilltops in what is Palestinian territory is all about this. It's reclaiming land of Israel for the Jewish people and saying we are here, and how dare the army take us away from the land, right? So that's why there's always a debate as to whether the army should go in and clear these Jews who have declared a settlement on top of a hilltop. And then some members of Knesset or even cabinet ministers would go to the hilltop in support of the settlers who are there, because it's all about this, reclaiming the land of Israel for the holy Jewish land of Israel. Okay, so I'm just saying that this is not just for one period of history. It's still being played out in Israel today, even though Palestinians are not idol worshipers. Okay, So there are those who are claiming that it's not just about idol worshipers, it's about any non-Jew to be able to own the land of Israel. Okay, and 100 years ago or more, when the blue boxes from the JNF went around, and we were putting coins in those boxes, all of that was this reclaiming the land of Israel for the Jewish people. So when the land of Israel was under the Ottoman Empire was willing, in some cases, to sell the land back to Jewish ownership. And then when the British took over, less inclined to sell land to Jews. Okay, so but it's all of this coming to life today in Israeli politics. The Mishnah teaches that according to Rabbi Meir, outside of Eretz Yisrael, one may sell houses and rent fields, but one may not sell fields to Gentile. Yes, Debbie or Jesse.
So is this vision fundamentally expansionist in the sense that it anticipates a greater Israel, Eretz Israel, kind of providing for the day when Jewish ownership of the land kind of overspreads the entire region?
So yeah, go ahead.
No, sorry.
No. This is not about expansionist, but it depends. Jabotinsky would his political party, his Zionist political party, before the state of Israel was established, had as part of its slogan or its logo what is today Israel and Jordan. So the map of Israel and Jordan was what is Israel and Jordan today was part of the logo of Jabotinsky. So that's to answer you for Jabotinsky, there is a greater Israel. For the conversation today, it's not necessarily about expansionist. It's about reclaiming the entirety of the biblical land of Israel. And the problem is that we don't know exactly what the boundaries are, right? So some say the boundaries are what the rabbis discuss as the boundaries of the land of Israel that is required that is under the obligation of all the agricultural laws, right? So that boundary the rabbis talk about in the Mishnah, but it's not in the Talmud, it's not in our Talmud, and not in the Babylonian Talmud, because the Babylonian Talmud doesn't deal with laws with the land of Israel. It's in the Jerusalem Talmud. So the first section of the Talmud is brachot, from the tractate Zra'im, which is agricultural law. But we only have brachot in the Talmud. The rest of the tractate is all about the agricultural law, and it's in there when it talks about tithes or whatnot, and sabbatical year, that it talks about the boundaries of Israel that are under those laws. And Gaza is not under the boundary. Okay, so that's why Ariel Sharon was able to give up Gaza back to the Palestinians, because it's not biblical land of Israel. But ceding the Palestinian territories today, that definitely is biblical land of Israel. So everywhere the Palestinians are in the heart of biblical Israel is biblical Israel. And so that was a lot harder to reach an agreement with Palestinians. And everybody at the time was willing to give it a chance, because the Israelis saw the Palestinians may be committed to peace. So your peace trumps lots of other laws. Even God was willing to lie for the sake of peace in the house, right? So there's a classic midrash when the angels came to tell Sarah and Abraham that Sarah's going to be pregnant and give birth to Isaac. Sarah, the Torah says, Sarah laughs and says, my husband's too old. But God said, in telling Abraham what Sarah said, God said that Sarah said she's too old. So why does God change the story? For the sake of peace in the house. So peace is the most important thing. So even giving up biblical land of Israel for peace. But because of what's happened with the Palestinians since 1993 and Rabin and Clinton and Arafat signing the Oslo Accords on the Rose Garden, since then everything has gone downhill. Nobody's willing to cede control to the Palestinians anymore. But anyway, nobody's talking about Greater Israel. Nobody's talking about the Jabotinsky's view. Right. So no, it's all about getting back the biblical land of Israel. Okay. So this Mishnah teaches that according to Rabbi Meir, outside of Eretz Yisrael, one may sell houses and rent fields, but one may not sell fields to Gentiles. Gemara explains concerning a field which has two problems. When it is in Eretz Yisrael, the sages issued a decree preventing its sale even outside of Eretz Yisrael. Concerning houses which do not have two problems, the sages did not issue a decree prohibiting their sale. Not sure how these problems apply outside of Israel. The problems of tithing only applies inside of Israel. And what was the other issue with aiding Gentiles and camping in the land? And camping in land that's not part of Israel, that's not an issue either. So I'm not sure why they issued that decree even outside of Israel. I'm not sure what the sages were thinking, but maybe when they're talking outside of Israel, they're still close to Israel, and they don't want to give the impression that if it's okay this close to Israel, maybe it's okay in Israel too. So as opposed to selling land in Germany, which by the time of the commentators is hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of miles away. So there's no, So the Mishnah further teaches that Rabbi Yossi says, in Eretz Yisrael, one may rent houses, but not fields to Gentiles. The Gemara explains, what's the reason that one may rent houses, but not fields? Concerning fields, which have two problems, the sages issued a decree as a preventative measure prohibiting the renting of fields in Eretz Yisrael. But concerning houses, which do not have two problems, the sages did not issue a decree prohibiting renting houses to Gentiles. The Mishnah teaches that Rabbi Yossi rules. And in Syria, one may sell houses and rent fields to Gentiles, but one may not sell fields. The Gemara asks, what's the reason that one may not sell houses but not fields? The Gemara answers, Rabbi Yossi holds that the conquest of an individual is not called a conquest, and therefore there's no prohibition by Torah law against selling houses in Syria. And concerning a field which has two problems, the sages issued a decree as a preventative measure prohibiting the sale of fields in Syria. Concerning houses which do not have two problems, the sages did not issue a decree prohibiting their sale. The Mishnah continues, and outside of Eretz Yisrael, one may sell houses and fields. The Gemara asks, what's the reason for this? The Gemara answers, since this land is at a distance from Eretz Yisrael, the sages do not issue a decree, unlike Syria, which is near Eretz Yisrael. Right, the closer you get to Israel, the holier the land is, and you don't want to get on that slippery slope. But the further away, you don't have to worry about that. There's no argument. There's no sense that anybody would think that this is land of Israel. In conclusion, Rav Yehuda says that Shmuel says the halacha is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yossi, that it's permitted to sell houses outside of Eretz Yisrael to Gentiles. Rav Yosef says, and this is the halacha, provided that one does not make it into a Gentile settlement. And how many people constitute a settlement? The sage taught there is no settlement that consists of fewer than 3 people. So that's another interesting question. So can you sell a house when you know you're establishing a Gentile settlement? And even, no matter where you are in the world, helping to establish a settlement of Gentiles is a bad thing because the Gentiles hate the Jews. So why are you aiding and abetting Gentiles to settle? And they will most likely then enact laws that will be anti-Jewish. That seems to be what the issue is. Yeah. So, okay. Provided that, so I'm looking at the background here, or the notes on the side. Provided that one does not make it a Gentile settlement. Some explain that this passage is referring to the renting of houses in Eretz Yisrael, which is permitted according to Rabbi Yossi. If so, the concern with regard to creating a Gentile settlement is referring to the prohibition against letting Gentiles acquire property in Eretz Yisrael. Other early commentaries explain that the Gemara here is addressing selling houses outside of Eretz Yisrael. According to some commentaries, the concern is that a Gentile settlement might pose a danger for Jews, and therefore this is similar to a prohibition against selling weapons to Gentiles, which could lead to bloodshed. For this reason, some maintain that the Gemara's statement applies to renting houses in Jewish neighborhoods, and this is in fact stated as halacha. So in a Jewish neighborhood, you might have a concern about renting a house, so it's kind of like these neighborhood laws, right? You don't sell to blacks, back in the 50s and the 60s, right? Don't if it's a Jewish neighborhood, don't sell to a Gentile because of bringing anti-Semitism back to the neighborhood. So it's a fascinating kind of idea, what kind of business we're allowed to get into that as a result will not bring about anti-Semitism or anti-Jewish laws. It's just fascinating stuff. Yes, Arnie.
And the last paragraph you just read, it's got this like superscript thing, NH. What does that mean? Like
The NH, N refers to the notes on the page. That's the left side. H refers to halacha.
Okay.
So the B refers to background. So it depends on the page. So this page only has notes and has halacha. So it's N and H. That's
Okay.
what it refers to. Okay, right. So what constitutes a neighborhood or a settlement? Oh, what constitutes a Jewish neighborhood? Oh, that's an interesting question Michael's asking. I don't know. You have a minion of Jews maybe to make it a neighborhood? I don't know. So then if you again, you can't sell to 3 or more Gentiles at one time because that constitutes a settlement, and then there goes the neighborhood in more ways than one. Okay, so we go on. The Gemara challenges, but let us be concerned that perhaps this Jew will go and sell to one Gentile, and the other owners of the adjacent houses will go and sell to 2 other Gentiles, resulting in a Gentile settlement. All right, so if one Jew is selling to one Gentile, okay, but what if neighbors then sell independently and it ends up being 3 Gentiles buying 3 houses? So can you prevent individual owners from selling to individual Gentiles? Abaye said, we are commanded about placing a stumbling block before the blind, but we are not commanded about placing a stumbling block before someone who may place it before the blind. In other words, this prohibition applies only when one causes another to sin by his direct action, not in a situation such as this, where the prohibition is 2 stages removed from the Jew's action. In other words, you can't prevent one independent Jews who happen to be neighbors from selling independently to Gentiles, even though the result of all those independent sales would be the violation of this command of establishing a Gentile settlement. Okay? So placing a stumbling block before the blind is something that was in yesterday's Torah portion, and it's not meant to be understood literally, right? You're not just prohibited from causing a blind person to stumble or trip. It's applied to aiding, helping an ignorant person violate Jewish law. That's placing a stumbling block before the blind. Okay, so if you're doing something that will cause someone to violate a law, that's placing a stumbling block before the blind. Okay, the Mishnah teaches that even in a place with regard to which the sages said that it is permitted for a Jew to rent a house to a Gentile, they did not say that one may rent it for use as a residence. The Gemara points out by inference, this means that there is a place where one may not rent any house to a Gentile. And this unattributed opinion in the Mishnah is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Meir. As if you say that this ruling is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yossi, that cannot be, since he holds that in every place one may rent a house to a Gentile, including Eretz Yisrael. The Gemara teaches, and in every place, one may not rent a bathhouse to a Gentile, as it is called by the name of the owner. The Gemara notes that it's taught in a Baraita that Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel says, a person may not rent his bathhouse to a Gentile because it's called by the name of the owner, and this Gentile uses it for performing prohibited labor on Shabbatot and on festivals. Right? So that's the expansion of this idea of why not to rent a bathhouse, because even though you're not doing any work in it, it's still yours, and people would think that you're violating Shabbat and holidays by keeping the bathhouse open. And keeping the bathhouse open means that you're running a fire in it to heat the water, and maintaining a fire or adding fuel to a fire is prohibited on Shabbat and on festivals. The Gemara asks, it's prohibited to rent one's bathhouse to a Gentile, but with regard to a Samaritan, what is the halacha? So a Samaritan are those people who are not Jewish, but some of the things they do are quasi-Jewish. And there's a group of Samaritans still today living in central Israel and in Palestinian territory around the city of Shechem. It can be inferred from the lack of mention of a Samaritan that it is permitted. The Gemara asks, why not say that a Samaritan will perform work in the bathhouse during the intermediate days of a festival? The Gemara answers, during the intermediate days of a festival, we too perform work and heat bathhouses. Right? So in other words, Samaritans observe Shabbos and holidays, so maybe it's okay to rent to a Samaritan, but they are more liberal about Chol HaMoed, the intermediate days of a festival like Sukkot and Passover, where rabbis say we shouldn't really be doing work, right? So the Jewish day school is open in Rockville during Sukkot, but Hebrew Academy is closed during Sukkot because of the idea of the question whether schoolwork counts as work that you're not supposed to be doing on a holiday. So most people agree that you can do work on the intermediate days of the holiday, but in rabbinic times, there was a question about it. So the Samaritans did work on the intermediate days. So maybe it's okay to rent to them the bathhouse. Well, maybe it's not okay because we're Jewish, they're Samaritans, the bathhouse is open, and the rabbis are saying, no, we keep bathhouses open during the intermediate days. The Gemara further infers it's prohibited to rent one's bathhouse to a Gentile, but with regard to renting one's field to a Gentile, what is the halacha? Evidently, it's permitted. What's the reason for this? People know that a Gentile sharecropper works for his tenancy, not for the Jewish owner. The Gemara asks, but if so, in the case of a bathhouse as well, why not say that the Gentile sharecropper works for his tenancy, and therefore a Jew should be permitted to rent them to Gentiles? Mara answers, people do not usually make this type of arrangement whereby a second party works as a sharecropper of a bathhouse. Consequently, it will be assumed that the Gentile is a hired worker who is working for the Jew. So there are two notes here. Sharecropper for his tenancy, despite the fact that the sharecropper must give part of his produce to the owner of the field, the Gentile works for himself, not as the Jew's employee. Since there's no prohibition against the Gentile performing labor on Shabbat for his own benefit, it's permitted to rent the field to him. Sharecropper of a bathhouse, the early commentaries explain that since the only reason that it's prohibited for a Gentile to perform work in a bathhouse that belongs to a Jew is that observers will believe that the Jew is benefiting from the labor, the prohibition is dependent on local custom. If it's customary to hire workers only as employees in the bathhouse, it's prohibited to rent the property to a Gentile who would serve as a tenant. If it's customary to rent bathhouses to tenants, then it's permitted. So it all depends on the community and community custom. Yes, Bess?
Silly question. An Orthodox person during, well, let's do Pesach, she can turn on the stove, keep a fire going,
Yeah,
and milk a cow?
yeah. Yeah, you could do that kind of work, but there's some other kind of work. Some people say you shouldn't do laundry during intermediate days of the holiday. That kind of work. So it depends on the kind of work that you're doing. But necessary work like milking a cow or a goat or a sheep is necessary. Sar ba'alei chayim, the pain of the animal if you don't milk it. The question, it depends on the kind of work that you're doing and whether it's necessary work or not. Okay. So here's a little bit of background on who the Samaritans are. The Samaritans are the descendants of the nations displaced by Sennacherib, king of Assyria, and brought to settle in Eretz Yisrael. Eventually, they accepted upon themselves several mitzvot. At the beginning of the Second Temple period, during the times of Ezra and Nehemiah, relations between the Samaritans and the Jews deteriorated. Later, the Samaritans established a center of worship on Mount Gerizim, as they claimed that the sanctity of that mountain was established by one of the Ten Commandments. Some generations of sages recognized Samaritans as Jewish. They went so far as to say in the mitzvot that the Samaritans adopted, they are extremely exacting in their fulfillment, even more than Jews. Ultimately, as the Samaritans continued to distance themselves from the Jewish people in virtually every regard, they were accorded the legal status of Gentiles. A small community of Samaritans survives in Israel to this day, and many reside on Mount Gerizim outside of Shechem. Okay, so, and the Good Samaritan that's in the Christian Bible, it says from this group of people. Okay, so it's 10:21. Let's stop here today as we are about to go on to the next page. So we'll continue next week on page 112 here and continue this discussion of sale and rental to Gentiles.
Yeah, this is interesting.
Okay. Have a good day, everybody.
Thank you. Goodbye.
And
Thank you.
Bye.
Stay dry.
Good luck.
That's a challenge.